Oh, hello kids. I didn't see you there. I was just reading a book I wrote, Alison's Fishing Birds. Would you like me to read a bit to you? You would? All right, let's get started then. Page 9, Chapter 1, Alison's Dipper. One of Alison's favourite birds, and one of the easiest to watch too, is the dipper. More proper people than Alison and her father sometimes call it water ouzel. The dipper Alison watches most often lives along the river between her house and the sandy pool. She has seen it hundreds of times, on the rocks of the dam that shelters the water wheel down at her house, and the old slippery logs and sandy beaches of the sandy pool, anywhere and everywhere along the banks of the river. The dipper is not a very big bird, larger than a sparrow, but much smaller than a robin, very round and important and merry. His colours are sober, almost dull, unless you look at them very closely. A dark grey back that seems bluish sometimes when the light is on it. A head still dark grey, but with more of brown in it than the back. A breast scarcely lighter than the rest of him, and pale, slender, olive-green legs. But Alison loved him for his brisk, light movements, his flirting, stubby tail, and his friendliness. Though she saw the dippers often, Alison always remembers, best of all, one particular spring day, and it was the story of that she always told her dolls. It was a warm, lazy day, almost as warm and lazy as the real summer days, and Alison had gone only a little way up the river when she felt that she would like to lie down and just think. So she went to a secret place she had near the pasture fence, where there is a little sandy beach at the end of the river, hidden by a thick growing willows and marked off by a tall alder on the downstream side of an old twisted crabapple on the upstream side. The sand was dry and clean, so she lay down in it, looking out across the white leaping water of the wide rapid, where the river breaks from the sandy pool. Almost at once there was a quick, dark little streak of grey from downstream, and the dipper was perched on a rock in front of Alison, not more than half a dozen steps away from her. Alison had been feeling almost a little drowsy, but now her eyes opened wide and she kept very, very still. The dipper did not seem to have noticed her and stood on the rock for a few moments, quite still, except his bright little eyes twinkled and blinked. Then, just as suddenly as he had arrived, he flew from the rock to the stand in front of Alison and began to strut and run along the edge of the water. Soon he was wading into the water so that his legs were quite hidden and the tiny waves lapped his breast feathers. Then Alison could only see his head. Then that disappeared too, and he had walked right under the water. Alison got up very quietly and stood leaning against the crabapple tree. She could see the dipper walking along the bottom of the river, still with its little jerky movements, turning his head this way and that. He reached forward sharply and seemed to catch something in his beak, then bobbed up to the surface of the water. For a moment he sat there like a little grey duck, shaking the water from his dumpy tail. Then he flew with his quick little flight to another rock and perched on that. Alison watched him with all her attention, making up the story to tell her dolls. He was never still, standing on the rock without moving his feet. He bobbed his little round body up and down, bob, bob, bob. And with each bob there was a little flash of white as his eyelids came up to cover his eye in a blink. Bob, 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 blink, 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 bob, blink, bob, blink, bob, blink. Alison said it over to herself very quietly, so that he would not hear her. Suddenly, with a quick skittering movement, he was off the rock and swimming in the water again. The bobbing seemed to go on as he swam, poking his head forward searching under the water with his shiny black eyes. Then, with a great big bob and a flick of his tail, he dived right under the water. This time, Alison could see him swimming hard, with his grey wings and his little legs working for all they were worth. And in front of him, swimming its hardest too, was a little fish. But the dipper swam faster and caught the little fish, then came to the surface so fast that he fairly popped out into the air and bounced a little as he sat there. He swam along for a few strokes with the little fish shining and wriggling in his beak, then flew. Flitter-fly, flitter-fly, said Alison to herself. And that was really very much how he did fly, to perch on yet another rock. On the rock, he went bob, 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 and blink, blink, blink. Then he put his little head back and swallowed the little fish. When that was over, he went on bobbing and blinking as though nothing at all had happened. Alison was rather worried. She had never thought of the little dippers eating fish before, and she had often heard her father and other men talking about birds that ate fish. Her father didn't seem to mind very much, but most of the other men thought that they ought to shoot all the birds that ate fish. Alison decided to say something to the dipper. "That's pretty bad of you, you know," she said. "You shouldn't catch little fish and eat them like that." The dipper didn't stop his bobbing and blinking at all, but he put his little head on one side and looked up at Alison. "Guess I've got to live, haven't I?" he asked. "And guess I've got to eat to live?" "Yes," Alison said, "but not little fish, or their eggs. You can catch caddis grubs and beetles and things like that, I know, because I've seen you." The dipper bobbed several times. "Easier to get the fish this time of year. There's plenty of them anyhow, meant for me, just this way. I take a lot of little fish, and you have me. The merganser takes a lot of little fish, and you have him. And you have enough little fish left over to make some big fish. Isn't it better to have a lot of different things instead of a lot of the same things?" Alison didn't know quite what to say to that, but she tried anyhow. "Well, I'm sure it's not right. I've heard them say so lots of times, and I'm afraid they might come and shoot you if you go on doing it." The dipper didn't seem to think so. "Hardly," he said. "I'm too small. Anyway, it's salmon they want. And I'm like the merganser and the heron. I catch more bullheads than I do trout and salmon, and the bullheads eat trout and salmon. So I help more than I hinder. You want to learn that sort of thing, you know. We all fit in pretty neatly and help to keep things going smoothly." The dipper skittered off the rock again, swam a few jerky little strokes, bobbed under the water, bobbed up again, and then flew. This time he went on up the river, close to the bank and very fast. Alison watched him and could see him turn off sharply to follow up the little creek that joined the river halfway up the sandy pool. She wondered how she could finish the story for her dolls. It was springtime, and she knew the female dipper would be sitting on her white eggs in the round mossy nest, with the entrance through a hole at the side. She even knew where the nest was, on a ledge of rock right under the tumbling falls of the little creek, so that the birds had to fly right through the falling water to reach it. But would the male sleep perched on the rock beside the nest? He never seemed to mind about the water. Or would he go well away somewhere and find a comfortable branch in the willow bush? Alison was still wondering when she got home. Well, that's all for today. It was lovely to have you all here with me. I'm looking forward to our next visit.
This has been Reading with Roddy.